This hour, speaking at the second annual meeting of the New Development Bank here in Delhi. Economy is set to grow at 7.2% this year, though emerging markets will face newer global challenges. The finance minister said global growth is moving upwards and is expected to improve further in the financial year 2017-2018. Of course, there has been a lot of talk about how, despite the impact of demonetization, which was introduced by the government on the 8th of November last year, there has been very little impact on the economic growth of the country, at least as per the statistics that have been put out by the government. All right, for more on that, let's now go across to my colleague Madhav, who joins us on the phone line. Madhav, Arun Jaitley there talking about the global trends, but sounding optimistic, saying things are going to look up over the next financial year and that India's growth is likely to, in fact, be steady at over 7%.
Globally, we're looking at growth rates coming down. Clearly, India being that a bright spot on the, future as far as financial growth is concerned, and certainly 7.7% is a projection as far as the next financial year is concerned, and that's certainly something that is a statement that at some level or the other would be welcome not just by the industry but also by those who are looking to prospectively invest in India. And that certainly, of course, is an interesting aspect, looking at 7.2% for the current fiscal and 7.7% for the next financial year. That's certainly going to be something at some level or the other that is bound to boost investor sentiment. We will, of course, have to see whether the expectations of the government really do pan out on ground.
Right. Madhav, two very important statistics there being given out by the finance minister, saying that India is expected to grow at 7.2% in the current financial year and perhaps is going to get significantly better and rise to 7.7% in the subsequent year. But, Madhav, we have seen a debate in recent weeks and months over the government's claims about India's GDP growth, because the government has maintained that demonetization has had little or no impact on the growth of the economy, but the data put out by the government has been questioned by some critics.
Well, of course, there will be bound to be criticism as far as the government is concerned. Demonetization, for instance, has seen widespread criticism, particularly in the international media. But look at the kind of political impact that a move such as demonetization has had, particularly in the elections of a large state such as Uttar Pradesh. Clearly, of course, demonetization, if it was such an unpopular move, would certainly have led to very different outcomes politically. And that clearly is what the government has been saying all along. The entire move of demonetization at some level or the other has been able to reach out to the last man standing in the line, and that's certainly why there is this overwhelming support as far as the center is concerned at some level or the other, and that's going to be the point that they're going to be raising. Of course, there would be short-term impact felt in 1 or 2 quarters, but what the government is really saying is that a move such as demonetization in the long run is bound to help the economy, and certainly, of course, not just in terms of cleaning up black money, but also in terms of the kind of online transactions which really, of course, at some level or the other do boost the entire GDP of the country.
Right. Madhav, also, looking at this rather rosy picture that the government seems to be painting, another important point that has been made there by the finance minister is how he is optimistic not just about India's growth prospects over the next 1 or 2 financial years, but he also seems to suggest that the global economy, which has been reeling under a slowdown, is also likely, in fact, to do much better over the next year.
Well, yes, that of course remains to be seen really how much that pickup really happens in terms of the global scenario. But certainly, of course, we will have to take the finance minister's word for it, at least in terms of the Indian economy, because clearly he would be privy to what exactly is going on as far as the economy is concerned. And the government at some level or the other looking at a 0.5% spike in growth rates is certainly an interesting observation, and one that is sure to be analyzed in coming days and weeks. Of course, ultimately, whether the government is able to walk the talk on the 7.7% growth rate is another matter entirely. One will, of course, have to see whether these plans are on ground, as I was mentioning earlier, and, of course, what the factors are that the government is considering before it's made such an announcement, whether those factors actually come into play. These are some important aspects that the government will certainly have to explain in coming days as well.
All right, Madhav, we leave it at that. Thanks very much for joining us with those details. As Madhav pointed out there, the government's prognosis for the Indian economy is rather optimistic. The Finance Minister has put out the figures of 7.2% and 7.7% for India's GDP growth over the next 2 years. But the question really is, will the reality on the ground bear out the government on this? Will the government be able to walk the talk and put into place all those economic measures and reforms that they have been promising? Of course, we have only this week seen a major economic reform. Many have labelled it the biggest economic reform or tax reform in the history of independent India. GST finally going through and expected to become a reality, come into force from the 1st of July. But really, as far as the GDP is concerned, that is a different kettle of fish altogether. Of course, several critics have, in fact, questioned both the data put out by the government and the metric used by the government to gauge the growth of the country's economy. But the skepticism of critics apart, it does look like, going by the government's claims and figures put out by the Finance Minister, that the Indian economy is well on track.